I was 68 years old when I buried my husband of 42 years. But the people sitting in the front row at his funeral? I'd never seen them before in my life. My name is Charlotte Morrison, and I'm coming to you from my home in Portland, Oregon. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you something. Where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments. I'd love to know who's listening to my story. Now, let me take you back to that devastating week in March. My husband Robert, everyone called him Bob, had suffered a massive heart attack while golfing with his Thursday group. He was gone before the ambulance arrived. 42 years of marriage ended in an instant on the 7th hole of Riverside Country Club. The funeral arrangements were a blur. Our daughter Jessica flew in from Boston, and our son Michael drove up from Sacramento. They helped me choose the casket, pick out Bob's Navy suit, write the obituary. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life fall apart. The funeral was scheduled for Saturday at Morrison & Sons. Funeral home, no relation to us, just an unfortunate coincidence that made everything feel even stranger. I arrived early with Jessica and Michael, greeting guests as they filtered in. Bob's golf buddies, our neighbors, people from the community center where we volunteered, familiar faces offering familiar condolences. Then I noticed them. 3 people I'd never seen before walked straight past the guest book and positioned themselves in the front row. Not off to the side, dead center, right where family sits. A woman in her late 50s with severe features and perfectly styled gray hair. A man about the same age, heavyset with cold eyes. And a younger woman, maybe 30, who kept glancing at her phone. I leaned toward Jessica. "Do you know who they are?" She shook her head, frowning. "Maybe Dad's work colleagues?" But Bob had retired from his engineering firm 8 years ago. These weren't people from his retirement party or Christmas gatherings. I would have remembered them. Throughout the entire service, the 3 strangers sat stone-faced. They didn't cry during the eulogy, didn't bow their heads during the prayer, just sat there, watching everything with an intensity that made my skin crawl. When it came time for people to pay their respects at the casket, the older woman approached me. She didn't offer condolences. Instead, she studied my face like she was memorizing it, then said something that stopped my heart. "We'll be in touch, Charlotte." She knew my name, but I didn't know hers. Before I could respond, the 3 of them left together, walking out before anyone else. I watched through the funeral home windows as they stood by a black Mercedes in the parking lot, talking in a tight circle. The older woman kept gesturing, clearly upset about something. "Mom?" Michael touched my arm. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I hadn't seen a ghost, but I had a terrible feeling I'd just seen something far worse. People who knew things about my husband that I didn't. I had no idea how right I was. The days after Bob's funeral passed in a fog of casseroles from neighbors and sympathy cards I couldn't bring myself to read. Jessica stayed for 3 days before flying back to her job, and Michael left the following morning. Suddenly, the house that had felt too small for 2 people felt enormous and empty for 1. I tried to keep busy with the mundane tasks of grief. Thank you notes, insurance paperwork, organizing Bob's clothes for donation. Every drawer I opened felt like an invasion of privacy, even though he was gone. His reading glasses on the nightstand, his coffee mug still in the dish drainer, the crossword puzzle book on his side of the couch, a pen marking where he'd stopped forever. But I kept thinking about those 3 strangers. Who were they? How did that woman know my name? What did "we'll be in touch" mean? I got my answer exactly 1 week after the funeral. It was Tuesday afternoon around 2 o'clock. I was sorting through Bob's desk in the study, trying to organize decades of files and paperwork when the doorbell rang. Through the front window's sheer curtain, I could see 2 figures on my porch, the older woman and man from the funeral. My hand froze on the drawer handle. Everything in me screamed not to answer that door, but they'd already seen movement inside. The woman leaned closer to the window, peering in. I took a breath and opened the door, keeping the chain lock engaged. "Can I help you?" Up close, the woman looked harder than she had at the funeral. Sharp cheekbones, thin lips, expensive clothes. The man beside her crossed his arms over his chest, taking up space like he owned it. Charlotte Morrison? The woman's voice was crisp, businesslike. My name is Patricia Crawford. This is my brother Dennis. We're Robert's family. The words didn't make sense. Excuse me? Robert's family, she repeated slower this time, like I was stupid. His sister and brother, we need to discuss some important matters regarding his estate. I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. Bob didn't have any siblings. He was an only child. Patricia's smile was cold and sharp as a knife. Is that what he told you? How convenient. Dennis spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly. We need to come inside, Charlotte. There are things you need to know about your husband, things he apparently never mentioned. I don't understand. Of course you don't. Patricia's patience was clearly wearing thin. That's why we're here, to explain Robert's real life before he reinvented himself in Oregon, before he became Bob Morrison and played house with you. The way she said played house made my blood run cold. 42 years of marriage reduced to pretend in 3 syllables. I think you should leave, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We'll leave, Dennis said, but we'll be back. With lawyers if necessary, because half of everything in that house, he gestured broadly, legally belongs to the Crawford family, including the house itself. Then they turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway with my entire life crumbling around me. I slammed the door and locked it, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. My heart pounded against my ribs as I leaned against the wall, trying to process what had just happened. Bob's family? The Crawford family? Half of our house? None of it made sense. Bob had told me he was an only child. His parents had died before we met. His mother from breast cancer when he was 19, his father from a stroke 2 years later. He'd shown me their grave markers in Seattle during one of our early trips together. I'd placed flowers there, held his hand while he fought back tears. Had that all been a lie? I stumbled to the study where I'd been working before they arrived. Bob's desk looked different now, like it was hiding secrets in every drawer. I started pulling out files with shaking hands, tax returns, mortgage documents, insurance policies. Everything said Robert James Morrison, born January 15, 1953, in Seattle, Washington. Social security number, driver's license, bank accounts, all in that name. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? I grabbed my phone and called Jessica. Mom, what's wrong? You sound upset. Those people from the funeral, I said, my voice cracking. They came to the house. They say they're your father's siblings. They say his real name was Crawford. They say they have a claim to our house. Silence on the other end. Then, that's insane. Dad was an only child. You need to call the police. And tell them what? That people claiming to be family showed up at my door? They haven't threatened me, they just... I pressed my hand to my forehead. Jessica, what if your father lied to us? Mom, stop. You're in shock. You're grieving. These people are obviously con artists trying to take advantage of a widow. Don't listen to them. But I couldn't shake the look in Patricia Crawford's eyes. She hadn't seemed like a con artist. She'd seemed like someone who believed every word she was saying. After Jessica hung up, promising to call Michael and to look into getting me a lawyer, I sat in Bob's study for hours as the afternoon light faded. I stared at the photos on his desk, our wedding picture from 1981, the kids at various ages, family vacations to Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon, Disneyland. Were any of those memories real? Or had I been living with a stranger for 42 years? At some point, I opened Bob's laptop. I'd never snooped through his computer before. We'd always trusted each other. But trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. His password was our anniversary, 0612. The computer opened to his email inbox, mostly spam and golf course newsletters. I spent an hour searching for anything connected to Crawford or Patricia or Dennis. Nothing. Then I noticed a folder in his documents titled Seattle 1975. I clicked it open and found a single PDF file, a scanned newspaper article from the Seattle Times, dated April 3rd, 1975. The headline made my stomach drop. Crawford family patriarch dies in boating accident. Questions remain about missing son. And there, in the grainy photograph beneath the headline, was my husband's face, younger, harder, but unmistakably Bob. My vision blurred as I stared at the screen. The article was short, just a few paragraphs about a wealthy Seattle businessman named Thomas Crawford, who died when his sailboat capsized during a storm on Puget Sound. The article mentioned his surviving family, his wife Margaret, daughter Patricia, son Dennis, and younger son Robert Crawford, who had apparently disappeared 2 weeks before his father's accident and hadn't been seen since. The article ended with a single chilling line. Police are asking anyone with information about Robert Crawford's whereabouts to contact Seattle authorities. I clicked frantically through the folder, looking for more, but that was the only file. Why had Bob kept this? Why had he kept evidence of the life he'd supposedly left behind? I searched Robert Crawford, Seattle, 1975 on my phone. Several more articles came up, each one adding pieces to a puzzle I didn't want to complete. The Crawford family had owned a commercial real estate empire in Seattle. Thomas Crawford's death had been ruled an accident, but there had been speculation about the timing of Robert's disappearance. One article from 6 months later reported that Robert Crawford had been declared legally dead after his car was found abandoned near the Canadian border. The family had held a memorial service. His name was on his father's headstone. But Robert Crawford hadn't died. He'd become Bob Morrison and moved to Portland. He'd met me at a library fundraiser in 1979. We'd married 2 years later. We'd built a life on a lie. I don't know how long I sat there reading and rereading those articles. At some point, the doorbell rang again. I jumped, my heart racing, convinced Patricia and Dennis had returned. But when I peeked through the window, I saw a young woman, the third person from the funeral. She stood alone on my porch, looking nervous and checking over her shoulder like she didn't want to be seen. Against my better judgment, I opened the door a crack. "Mrs. Morrison?" Her voice was soft, uncertain. "Please don't shut the door. I'm Natalie Crawford, Patricia's daughter. I need to talk to you, but they can't know I'm here." "I don't want to talk to anyone from your family." "I know, I understand. But there are things my mother isn't telling you. Things you need to know before she comes back with lawyers." Natalie glanced over her shoulder again. "Please, 5 minutes. I'm trying to help you." Everything in me said not to trust her, but she looked genuinely frightened, and I desperately needed information. I opened the door and let her inside. Natalie rushed in and immediately moved away from the windows. "My mother and uncle don't know I'm here. They think I drove back to Seattle. But I stayed because this whole thing feels wrong. Your mother says she's Bob's sister." "She is. Robert Crawford was her younger brother. But the story she's telling you about coming for his estate, that's not the whole truth." Natalie took a shaky breath. "Mrs. Morrison, my grandfather died under suspicious circumstances, and my mother has always believed Robert was involved." I felt like the walls were closing in. "What are you saying?" Natalie's hands twisted together nervously. "In 1975, my grandfather, Thomas Crawford, fell off his sailboat during a storm and drowned. But here's what my mother never told the police. 2 weeks before that happened, she overheard my grandfather and Robert having a massive fight in my grandfather's study. She was only 23 at the time, but she heard everything. What were they fighting about? Money. Control of the company. My grandfather was planning to cut Robert out of the inheritance because of some business deals Robert had made behind his back, risky investments that nearly bankrupted one of their properties. My grandfather called him reckless and said he'd never let Robert touch the family business. I sank onto the couch, trying to process this. And then your grandfather died. And Robert disappeared the same week, before anyone could question him. The police investigated, but there wasn't enough evidence. Robert's car turned up abandoned near Canada. Everyone assumed he'd either run away out of guilt or... She paused. Or taken his own life out of shame. But he didn't. No, he came here, changed his name, started over. Natalie sat down across from me. Mrs. Morrison, I've spent the last week going through old family papers my mother keeps in storage. I found something. Can I show you? She pulled out her phone and opened a photo. It showed an old letter, handwritten on yellowed paper. The date at the top read, May 1975. This is a letter Robert wrote to his mother a month after he disappeared. It was never mailed. My grandmother found it years later in a box of Robert's things from his apartment. He admits in this letter that he got into financial trouble and couldn't face his father. But Mrs. Morrison, he also says he had nothing to do with the boating accident. He says he left because he knew his family would blame him anyway. I studied the photograph, recognizing Bob's handwriting even from decades ago. Why are you showing me this? Because my mother is planning to claim that Robert killed my grandfather and then stole his inheritance by faking his death. She wants to sue your estate for wrongful death, go after your house, your savings, everything. She's been waiting 49 years for revenge. And now that Robert is finally dead, she's coming for you. My blood ran cold. Can she do that? I don't know. But she has lawyers, rich ones, and she's convinced she's owed something. Natalie leaned forward. Here's the thing, though. I've read everything. All the police reports, all the family documents. There's no actual evidence Robert was involved in my grandfather's death, just suspicion and family drama. My mother is operating on pure hatred. Then why are you helping me? Because you don't deserve this. You didn't know any of it. And because... Natalie's voice dropped to a whisper. My mother isn't the saint she pretends to be. She had her own reasons for wanting my grandfather dead, but she spent 50 years pointing the finger at Robert instead. Before I could respond, bright headlights swept across my living room window. Natalie jumped up, her face going pale. They found me. I have to go. Wait, what do you mean your mother had her own reasons? I grabbed Natalie's arm as she headed for the back door. I can't explain now, just be careful, and don't sign anything they put in front of you. She pulled free and slipped out through my kitchen, disappearing into the darkness of my backyard. Seconds later, someone pounded on my front door. Not a polite knock, an aggressive, demanding hammering that echoed through the house. Charlotte, open this door! Patricia's voice was sharp with fury. I know my daughter is in there. I took a breath, steadied myself, and opened the door with the chain still on. Patricia stood there with Dennis behind her, both of them radiating anger. Where is Natalie? I don't know what you're talking about. Her car is parked 2 blocks away. We tracked her phone location to this address. Patricia's eyes were wild now, nothing like the controlled woman from earlier. What did she tell you? She didn't tell me anything. Nobody's been here. Dennis pushed forward. You're lying. That little traitor has been feeding you stories, hasn't she? Trying to make us look bad? I'm calling the police, I said firmly. You need to leave my property. Call them. Patricia's laugh was harsh. Call them and I'll tell them you're harboring evidence about a murderer. That's right, Charlotte. Your precious husband was a killer. He murdered my father and stole 50 years of life that he didn't deserve. Every day you spent with him was built on my family's blood money. The venom in her voice shook me, but I held firm. You have no evidence of that. I have enough. And I have lawyers who'll tear apart everything Robert Morrison built. By the time I'm done, you won't have a roof over your head. She stepped closer, her face nearly pressed against the gap in the door. He took my father from me. Now I'm taking everything from you. I slammed the door in her face and locked it, then immediately called 911. The police arrived within 10 minutes. Patricia and Dennis were still in their Mercedes, parked across the street. 2 officers spoke with them, while a third took my statement on the porch. Ma'am, have these people threatened you? Officer Rodriguez asked, his pen poised over his notepad. They've demanded access to my house and made claims about my late husband. They're harassing me during my grief. I wrap my arms around myself. I want them to stay away from my property. After 20 minutes of back and forth between the officers and the Crawfords, Patricia and Dennis finally drove away. But not before Patricia rolled down her window and called out, "See you in court, Charlotte." After the police left, I triple-checked every lock in the house. Then I went back to Bob's study and kept digging. If Patricia Crawford wanted a war over the truth about Bob's past, she was going to get one. But I wasn't going to fight blind. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that subscribe button. I'm going to need all the support I can get for what happened next. I spent the entire night going through every file in Bob's desk, every box in our attic, every hidden corner of our life together. And I found something that changed everything. At 3 a.m, exhausted and desperate, I pulled down the attic stairs. Bob and I had stored 42 years of memories up there. Christmas decorations, baby clothes, tax returns from decades ago. I'd been putting off sorting through it all, but now I had no choice. I dug through box after box, old photo albums, Jessica's school papers, Michael's Little League trophies, normal family stuff that made my heart ache for the life I thought I'd had. Then I found a metal lockbox shoved behind a broken lamp in the far corner, covered in dust. It wasn't locked. Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Bob's original birth certificate showing Robert James Crawford, a passport from 1975 in his real name, and a thick manila envelope marked Thomas C. Final Documents. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written in Bob's handwriting, all addressed to his mother but never sent. They chronicled his first months in Portland, his fear, his guilt, his desperate hope that his family would understand why he'd left. But it was the last letter that broke my heart. "Mom, I know you'll never forgive me for leaving after Dad's death, but I need you to know the truth. Dad didn't die because of the storm. He went out on that boat to kill himself. I saw the note he wrote the night before. He was drowning in debt from Patricia's husband's failed ventures, debts he'd guaranteed with his own name to protect her. Dennis had been stealing from the company for years, and Dad had just discovered it. The whole empire was collapsing, and Dad couldn't face the shame. He told me in his note that he loved us all, but he couldn't watch everything he built get destroyed. He asked me not to tell Patricia and Dennis the truth because he wanted them to remember him with pride. Then he went out on that boat alone during a storm warning. By the time I found the note, he was already gone. I tried to stop him, Mom. I swear I tried. But Patricia blamed me anyway, and I couldn't defend myself without destroying Dad's memory. So I left. I'm sorry. Robert. I read it 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Bob hadn't killed his father. Thomas Crawford had taken his own life. And Bob had carried that terrible secret alone to protect his father's legacy, while his own family destroyed his name. The next morning, I called the lawyer Jessica had found for me, a sharp estate attorney named Helen Vance who specialized in family disputes. I brought her everything: the newspaper articles, Natalie's information about the letter to Bob's mother, and most importantly, Bob's own letter explaining the truth. Helen spread the documents across her conference room table, reading in silence. When she finally looked up, her expression was grim. "This is going to get ugly," she said. "Patricia Crawford has already filed a civil suit claiming your husband defrauded the Crawford estate. She's asking for 50 years of what she calls wrongful inheritance. Essentially, half of everything you and Bob built together. Can she win? Not if we fight back. But Charlotte, you need to be prepared. This will expose things about your husband's past. It will be painful. I don't care about the pain anymore. I care about the truth." Helen filed our response 2 weeks later. We didn't just deny Patricia's claims. We went on the offensive. We included Bob's letter about Thomas Crawford's suicide, witness statements from people in Portland who'd known Bob for decades, and a detailed timeline proving that Bob had built his life through his own hard work, not stolen money. We also subpoenaed the Crawford family's financial records from 1975. That's when things got interesting. Turns out Natalie was right about her mother. The records showed that Patricia's husband, Lawrence Cunningham, had invested heavily in a real estate scheme that collapsed in early 1975, using Thomas Crawford as a guarantor. When the deal went south, Thomas was suddenly liable for $3 million in debt. Patricia had known. She'd known her husband's failures were destroying her father, but she'd never told the family. And after Thomas died, the life insurance paid off most of that debt. Convenient. Helen scheduled depositions. Patricia was forced to testify under oath. So was Dennis, who it turned out had been embezzling from Crawford Properties for years, exactly as Bob's letter had said. The night before my own deposition, Natalie called me. "Mrs. Morrison, I thought you should know. My mother is planning to withdraw the lawsuit." "What?" "Her lawyers told her she's going to lose. Badly. And if this goes to trial, the whole family's dirty laundry comes out. Dennis could face criminal charges. My mother could be implicated in insurance fraud." Natalie's voice was soft. "She's going to drop it, but she'll never admit she was wrong. She'll tell everyone you bought your way out of it." "I don't care what she tells people. I care about protecting what Bob and I built." "I know. That's why I'm calling. Because there's one more thing." She paused. "I found the suicide note. The original one Robert mentioned in his letter. My grandmother kept it hidden in a safe deposit box. She never wanted Patricia or Dennis to know what really happened. When my grandmother died, the box passed to me. Can you send it to my lawyer?" "I already did. It's postmarked today. Mrs. Morrison, Robert was telling the truth. My grandfather's note says everything. He apologized to his children, explained his financial situation, and specifically asked Robert not to blame himself because you were the only one who tried to stop me." Her voice cracked. "My mother has spent 50 years hating the wrong person." 3 days later, Patricia Crawford's lawyer called Helen Vance and officially withdrew the lawsuit. No apology, no admission of wrongdoing, just a terse legal letter stating that after reviewing evidence, they were discontinuing their claim. Helen called me immediately. "Charlotte, it's over. They dropped everything. You keep the house, the accounts, all of it. They're not getting a penny." I should have felt relief. Victory, even. But mostly, I just felt exhausted and heartbroken for the man I'd loved. The man who'd spent decades running from a past he couldn't escape, carrying secrets to protect a father who'd given up, living in fear that the truth would find him. He'd built a beautiful life despite it all, despite the lies he'd had to tell, despite the family who'd never forgiven him for surviving when their father didn't. After the lawsuit was dropped, I thought I'd finally have peace. But 3 weeks later, Dennis Crawford showed up at my door. Alone this time, and looking nothing like the aggressive man who'd accompanied Patricia before. "Mrs. Morrison." He stood on my porch, hat in his hands. "May I please have 5 minutes? Just 5 minutes. I know I don't deserve it." Every instinct told me to slam the door, but something in his face, genuine shame maybe or regret, made me pause. 5 minutes, I said. "On the porch. The door stays open." He nodded, accepting the terms. "I came to apologize. Not because my lawyer told me to, not because I'm trying to get anything, just because it's the right thing to do." He took a shaky breath. "I was stealing from my father's company in 1975. Robert knew. He caught me and confronted me about it. I begged him not to tell our father, promised I'd pay everything back, but Robert said he couldn't keep that kind of secret. So you let him take the blame for your father's death?" "Yes." Dennis's voice broke. I knew Robert didn't kill Dad. Deep down, I always knew. But it was easier to let Patricia believe he did. Easier to let him be the villain so I didn't have to face what my stealing had done. Dad died because of the financial pressure I'd helped create. Why are you telling me this now? Because I've been living with guilt for 50 years, and it's eating me alive. Because my brother rebuilt his life into something good, and I tried to destroy it even after he was dead. And because... He pulled out an envelope from his jacket. This belongs to you. It's a check for $75,000. It's not even close to what you spent on legal fees or what you went through emotionally, but it's what I can afford. Please take it." I stared at the envelope. "I don't want your money." "I know, but I need you to take it anyway. I need to do one decent thing after 50 years of being a coward." His eyes were wet. "Robert was a good man. He was always the good one. And he loved you. I could tell from the life he built. I'm sorry I tried to take that away from you." He set the envelope on the porch railing and walked away without waiting for a response. I stood there for a long time, watching him get in his car and drive off. Then I picked up the envelope. Inside was the check and a short note. "Patricia will never apologize. She's too proud. But for what it's worth, I'm sorry. Dennis." I deposited the check the next day and donated it to the library where Bob and I had met. They used it to create a reading program for seniors. A small plaque went up, "In memory of Robert Morrison, who believed everyone deserved a second chapter." That felt right. Bob had lived his entire second chapter trying to be a better man than his first chapter had allowed him to be, and he'd succeeded. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal. Jessica and Michael visited more often, and we spent long evenings talking about their father, the real stories, not the mythology I'd built up over 42 years. They deserved to know the whole truth about the complicated, flawed, brave man who'd raised them. Patricia never reached out again. According to Natalie, she moved to Florida shortly after the lawsuit was dropped and refuses to discuss Robert to this day. Some people, I learned, would rather cling to their hatred than face uncomfortable truths. Natalie and I stayed in touch. She sent me copies of the photos she had of young Robert, before he became Bob, before he fled Seattle, when he was just a 22-year-old kid trying to navigate impossible family dynamics. In those pictures, I could see glimpses of the man I'd married, the same kind eyes, the same slightly crooked smile. 6 months after the lawsuit ended, I finally finished going through Bob's study. In the bottom drawer of his filing cabinet, I found one last letter, this one addressed to me, dated just 3 weeks before he died. "Charlotte, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry for the secrets I kept. I'm sorry for the life I left behind in Seattle and the lies I had to tell to build a new one. But I'm not sorry for finding you. You were the best part of my second chance. Everything good I did, everything decent I became, started the day I walked into that library fundraiser and saw you arguing with the event coordinator about the placement of the dessert table. You were magnificent. You still are. Don't let anyone make you doubt the life we built together. It was real. All of it. Every moment. If my past comes back to haunt you, and I fear it might, please know that I never stopped being the man you married. I just became him in Portland instead of Seattle. I love you. I'm sorry. I always will. Bob, I cried when I read it. Not sad tears this time, just tears of acceptance. Bob had been right. Our life together had been real. The house we'd bought, the children we'd raised, the quiet evenings reading side by side on the couch. None of that was a lie just because he'd changed his name. Today, I'm still in my house, still volunteering at the library, still living the life Bob and I built together, one day at a time. The strangers who showed up at his funeral tried to take that away from me. They claimed I'd been living with a murderer. They said everything I knew was a lie, but they were wrong. I was married to a man who made mistakes, carried impossible secrets, and chose every day to be better than his worst moment. A man who protected his father's memory at the cost of his own. A man who built something beautiful out of the ashes of his old life. That's who Bob Morrison was. That's who I choose to remember. And nobody, not Patricia, not Dennis, not the past, can take that truth away from me.